The snow was 3 days old and crusted with ice when Sable pressed her bare foot into it, feeling the burn travel up through her ankle and settle somewhere behind her kneecap. She held the impression there, letting her weight sink until the print was deep enough to fool a tracker, then lifted her foot and studied it. Too clean. A real wolf would drag its claws at the exit. She used 2 fingers to scratch 4 lines at the leading edge of the print, then blew the ice dust away and moved 6 inches forward to stamp the next one. Behind her, the grey mist pack's territory stretched in silence. Somewhere in the birch forest to the north, 300 enemy wolves from the Ashclaw clan were picking their way toward the valley, following a deer trail that would bring them straight to the pack's winter grain stores. They did not know that the deer trail ended at a ravine covered with pine branches and fresh snow. They did not know because Sable had spent the last 4 nights building that false trail print by print, drag mark by drag mark, until the path looked like a wounded elk had stumbled through the trees and collapsed somewhere just past the drop. She was the only one in Grey Mist who knew the ravine was there. She had fallen into it herself 2 winters ago, running from Horath after he caught her eating potato skins from the compost heap. 16 feet down, all loose shale and frozen mud. The fall had broken her wrist. She had set it herself with a stick and a strip torn from her undershirt, because no one in the pack house would waste a healer's time on a mute Omega who could not even shift. Sable finished the last print and sat back on her heels, flexing her numb toes. The cold had turned them the color of old candle wax. She tucked them under her thighs and pulled the rough wool cloak tighter around her shoulders. It smelled like mildew and sheep fat, because it had been a sheep's blanket before she stole it from the barn. The pack gave their Omegas clothing once per year at the autumn equinox, and this year Sable's allotment had been a single linen shift, so thin she could read through it. She checked her work one final time. The trail of false wolf prints curved away from the grain stores through the birch stand and down toward the ravine. At the edge, she had scattered dried rabbit blood she had collected from the kitchen gutters over the past week, storing it in a clay jar she kept buried behind the woodpile. The blood on snow would read as a wounded pack member. The Ashclaw scouts would follow it. They would think they were tracking easy prey. 3 times now Sable had saved the Grey Mist pack this way. 3 times, and not one of them knew it. She could not tell them. Literally could not. Her tongue had been cut at the root when she was 6 years old. Not by enemies, by the Grey Mist pack mother old Verlaine, who had declared that a wolfless Omega had no business speaking in a house of shifters. Verlaine was dead now, but the absence in Sable's mouth remained a smooth hollow where sound went to die. She could grunt. She could hum. She could make a high, thin noise that was not a howl and not a scream, but something between the two, and that noise was the loneliest sound she had ever produced, so she had stopped making it. What she could do was read tracks. She could read them the way other wolves read faces, with an instinct that went past learning into something her bones simply knew. Every wolf in Grey Mist left a signature in the mud, in the snow, in the dust of the dry summer roads. She knew Horath by the way his left rear paw turned inward. She knew the Beta Maran by the deep claw marks that spoke of a wolf who never fully retracted, always ready to strike. She knew the pups by their uneven spacing, and the elders by the careful, deliberate placement of each step. And she could forge any of them. This was her secret. Not a hidden bloodline, not a sleeping wolf, but a skill so specific and so strange that no one had ever thought to look for it. Sable could build a trail that would fool any tracker alive. She had been doing it since she was 12, when she realized that the pack that starved her and struck her and housed her in a closet beneath the stairs, still needed her, whether they knew it or not. The morning after Sable finished the false trail, the Ashclaw scouts fell into the ravine. All three of them. The sound carried across the valley like cracking timber, and the grey mist patrol found them at the bottom, 2 with broken legs and 1 with a shattered collarbone. Horath took credit for discovering the breach in their territory. Maren reported to the pack Alpha, a tired, grey-muzzled wolf named Ulrin, that the perimeter traps had worked exactly as designed. No one mentioned Sable. No one ever mentioned Sable. She watched from the kitchen window as the warriors celebrated, pressing her forehead against the cold glass until it left a circle of fog around her face. The cook, a stocky woman named Petra, set a pot of stew on the table for the fighters, and then turned and placed a single bowl of watered broth in front of Sable without looking at her. The broth had 3 lentils in it. Sable counted them as they sank. That should have been the end of it. Another invisible rescue, another hungry night, another season of survival in a pack that treated her like a stain on the floor. But Sable had made a mistake. She did not know it yet. She would not know it for another 48 hours, until she woke in her closet beneath the stairs to the sound of hooves in the courtyard and a voice that made every wolf in the pack house drop to their knees. The Alpha King was coming, and he had been following her trail, not the false one she had built for the Ashclaw. The real one. Her own footprints, the barefoot human ones she had left in the snow on her way back from the ravine, the ones she had been too cold and too tired to erase. She had walked home in the dark with her feet bleeding and her hands shaking, and she had left a trail that led from the most sophisticated track forge in the Northern Territories straight back to the kitchen door of Grey Mist Pack House. And someone had read it. The day the Alpha King arrived, Sable was elbow-deep in a wash-tub scrubbing blood out of training leathers. The water had gone pink and then rust-colored, and now was approaching a dark brownish red that reminded her of the clay at the bottom of the ravine. Her knuckles were cracked and bleeding, which meant her own blood was mixing with the old dried blood of whatever warrior had bled through his armor, and the lye soap was finding every split in her skin and burning. She felt the vibration first, through the stone floor, up through the balls of her feet, and into her shins. Hooves. Many of them. And underneath the hooves, something else, a bass note that was not sound exactly, but pressure, the way the air changes before a thunderstorm. Every wolf in the house felt it simultaneously. Sable watched Petra freeze mid-stir, watched 2 Omega girls who were folding linens near the hearth go completely still, watched the hair on her own forearms rise, even though the rest of her body had gone heavy and leaden. The front doors of the pack house opened without anyone touching them. Later, Sable would understand that the wind had done it, the displacement of air created by 300 mounted wolves arriving in a courtyard built for 50. But in the moment, it looked like the house itself was opening its throat to swallow whatever was coming. She heard Ulrin's voice first high and strained in a way she had never heard from the old Alpha. He was speaking in the formal register, the ancient words that packs used only for visiting royalty, and his pronunciation was so poor that Sable, who had read every book in the house, because reading was the only pleasure available to a mute girl in a closet, actually winced. Then she heard the other voice. It was low. Not loud, not commanding in the way she expected a king to sound. It was low the way the ocean floor is low, the way the roots of mountains are low. A voice that came from so far down inside a body that it seemed to bypass the air entirely and arrive in her chest without passing through her ears. It said 3 words. Where is she? Not a question. A statement. Sable's hands stopped moving in the washtub. The water rippled. Petra looked at the Omega girls. The Omega girls looked at each other. None of them moved. None of them understood. Footsteps in the corridor. Not boots, she realized. Bare feet. Enormous bare feet on stone, each step deliberate and unhurried, the gait of something that had never in its life needed to rush because nothing in the world was fast enough to run from it. The kitchen door did not open dramatically. It swung inward with a small creak, and a man filled the frame. Sable had seen alpha wolves before. Ulrin was an alpha. Horath had alpha blood, though he was ranked Gamma. She understood the physical markers, the height, the breadth, the density of muscle that came from a wolf's supernatural metabolism. She had catalogued these things the way she catalogued tracks clinically from a distance. This was different. He was taller than the doorframe and had ducked to enter. His hair was black and cut short, shorter than she expected, almost military, and it showed the full architecture of his skull, the heavy brow, the sharp jaw, the thick column of his neck. His eyes were not gold. Every story she had ever read described Alpha King eyes as gold. His were amber, closer to brown, the color of pine resin held up to firelight, and they were scanning the room with the flat, systematic patience of a predator who had already located his prey and was now simply choosing the angle of approach. He was scarred. Not decoratively, not in the romantic way the stories described, a single slash across the cheek, a claw mark on the shoulder. His scars were industrial, burns on both forearms that had healed in ridges, a thick, ragged line across his throat that looked like someone had tried to open it with a dull blade. A missing piece of his left ear, the top quarter, simply gone as if bitten off. He looked like a man who had been disassembled and put back together by someone working from memory. His name was Kael Voss, and he was the Alpha King of the Iron Fang Dominion, which controlled every pack territory from the northern ice flats to the southern river delta. He had taken the throne at 19 by killing his father, who had been killing everyone else. He was 28 now. He had never taken a Luna. Rumors said his wolf was so savage that no female could survive the mating bond. Other rumors said he simply hadn't found a wolf worth keeping. Sable knew all of this because she read everything, and because the pack house received news sheets from the capital every month, and because she had spent 9 years filing information, the way other people filed teeth, constantly and against everything. He looked at Petra. Petra dropped to her knees. He looked at the Omega girls. They were already on the floor. He looked at Sable. She was still standing, not out of defiance. Her hands were in the washtub, and if she moved them, bloody water would drip across the floor, and Horath would beat her for making a mess. This calculation happened instantly, and automatically, the arithmetic of an Omega's survival, and it kept her upright while the most powerful wolf in the known world stared at her from 12 feet away. The pressure in the room changed. Not metaphorically. The actual air pressure shifted, and Sable's ears popped, and the water in the washtub began to vibrate in concentric circles like something far below the earth was humming. His nostrils flared, and then his expression did something she had never seen on a face before. It didn't soften. It cracked. Like ice on a river in spring, a sudden structural failure across the entire surface, and underneath it was not warmth, but heat, a raw, staggering hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Mate," he said. One word. The room contracted around it. Sable's hands came out of the washtub, involuntarily sending pink water across the flagstones. She did not notice. She was too busy trying to understand what was happening inside her own body, because something had just woken up in her chest. Something that had been sleeping so long she had forgotten it was there, and it was stretching and turning and pressing against her ribs from the inside, like an animal trying to get out. She could smell him. She should not have been able to smell anything over the lye and the blood and the wool grease, but she could. Cedar. Not the sweet cedar of decorative sachets, but the sharp, almost medicinal cedar of freshly split heartwood, the kind that stings your eyes and coats the back of your throat. And underneath that something darker. Iron. Hot iron, the smell of a blacksmith's forge at midnight. Her wolf stirred. That was impossible. She did not have a wolf. She had never shifted, not once, in 23 years. Verlaine had cut her tongue because she was wolfless. The pack kept her as an omega because she was wolfless. Her entire identity, her closet, her broth, her silence was built on the foundational fact that she was wolfless. But something was moving inside her. Something with fur and teeth and a voice she had never heard. Kyle Voss crossed the kitchen in 4 strides. He moved the way a landslide moves, with an inevitability that made resistance absurd. He stopped close enough that she could see the pores of his skin, the individual black hairs of his eyebrows, the thin white line that bisected his lower lip, where it had been split and healed. He smelled like he had been walking through a forest fire. He looked down at her hands, the cracked knuckles, the lye burns, the old scars on her wrists where Horath had tied her to a post during last year's heat, when the unmated wolves had complained about her presence, and Horath's solution had been to simply immobilize her until it passed. His jaw tightened. A muscle in his scarred throat jumped. "Who did this?" he said. Still not a question. Sable opened her mouth. The absence where her tongue should have been was a shape he could see, and she watched the comprehension arrive in his eyes, like a weather front darkening everything it touched. He turned to Petra. The cook was still kneeling. "Her tongue," he said. "Who?" Petra's voice came out in a whisper. "The old pack, mother. Verlaine. She has been dead 8 years. And her hands, the scars on her wrists, the weight of her." He turned back to Sable, and she realized he was cataloguing her the way she catalogued tracks, reading every mark on her body, as if it were a print in the snow, extracting the story of what had passed through here and what it had been running from. "She weighs nothing. She is bones. Who has been feeding her?" Nobody answered. The answer was obvious. Kyle Voss breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth. The exhalation stirred Sable's hair. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped another register into a range that Sable felt in her molars. "Bring me the alpha of this pack," he said, "and the one who tied her." Then he did something Sable was not prepared for. He shrugged off his cloak, a massive thing of black wolf fur lined with dark wool, and draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it nearly buckled her knees. It was warm from his body, and the heat sank through her linen shift and into her skin, and the sensation was so foreign that her eyes watered. He saw the tears. His hand came up, and she flinched, and the flinch stopped him dead. His fingers hovered an inch from her face. He held them there motionless, the way you hold your hand near a wild animal, and he waited. Sable looked at his hand. It was enormous. The knuckles were scarred. There was a callus on the inside of his thumb that she recognized because she had the same one from gripping things too hard for too long. She leaned forward 1 millimeter and let her cheek touch his fingertips. The sound he made was not a word. It came from somewhere behind his sternum, a low, rolling vibration that was part growl and part something else. Something she had no name for, because she had never heard it directed at her. It sounded like recognition. He did not carry her out of the kitchen. He walked beside her, matching her pace, which was slow because Her feet were still numb, and she had a slight limp from a fall she had taken 2 nights ago on the ice. His hand rested on the small of her back, not pushing, just present a point of heat that she could feel through the fur cloak. The Omega girls watched from the floor with their mouths open. In the courtyard, 300 Iron Fang wolves sat on horseback in formation. They were armored. Their horses were larger than any Sable had seen, thick-necked war horses bred for the weight of a shifter. The lead rider, a woman with steel-colored hair braided tight against her skull, looked at Sable, looked at the cloak, looked at the Alpha King's hand on Sable's back, and swung down from her saddle. "My king," the woman said. "Lieutenant Dyer, find me a room in this house that has a fire and a lock, then find the healer." "Yes, sir." "And the pack, Alpha. Detain him." "And the Gamma called Horath." Lieutenant Dyer's eyes moved to Sable again. They were assessing, but not unkind. "What are the charges?" Kyle Voss looked at Sable. She was shaking, and she was not sure if it was cold or terror or the thing in her chest that kept pressing against her ribs. He reached over and adjusted the cloak where it had slipped off her shoulder. "I will let you know," he said, "when I have finished counting." They put her in Ulrin's study. It was the warmest room in the pack house, with a stone fireplace large enough to stand in, and a carpet of woven wool that felt like a living thing under Sable's bare feet. She had never been in this room. Omegas were not permitted above the 1st floor. The study was on the 3rd, and it had windows that looked out over the birch forest and the snow and the valley, where 2 days ago she had built the false trail that saved everything. The healer was a woman from the Iron Fang contingent, sharp-eyed and efficient. She examined Sable's hands, her feet, the ligature scars on her wrists, the puckered burn marks on the backs of her calves where someone had pressed a hot poker years ago. She did not ask who had done these things. She cleaned and bandaged in silence, and when she reached Sable's mouth and Sable opened it, to show the absence, the healer paused for exactly 2 seconds, then continued without comment. Kyle returned an hour later. He had changed from his riding clothes into a dark linen shirt and trousers, and without the armor and the cloak, he looked slightly less like a natural disaster, and more like a very large, very dangerous man who was trying hard not to break anything. He carried a wooden tray with bread, cheese, dried meat, and a ceramic pot of something that smelled like honey and thyme. He set the tray on the desk and pulled a chair to face her. He sat in it. Their knees were almost touching. He was so tall that even seated his eyes were level with hers. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and then I need to ask you something." Sable waited. "My wolf has been tracking a scent for 3 weeks. We were on a border patrol in the northern ridge when he caught it. Rain and distance and time, and still he caught it. I have never felt him like that. He is not a gentle animal. He has killed men. He has killed wolves. He does not whimper. He does not keen. But when he caught your scent on that ridge, he made a sound I have never heard from him. And he turned south, and I spent 3 weeks following that sound." He leaned forward. The pine resin and forge iron smell intensified. "I followed the scent to this valley, and then I found the tracks, not yours, the other ones, the wolf prints that were not wolf prints, the trail that led the Ashclaw scouts into the ravine." He paused. "I know what you did. I read it in the snow the way you wrote it. You built that trail, you forged those prints. I have trackers who have followed wolves across continents, and not one of them could have done what you did. It was—" He stopped. Sable saw him searching for a word. "Beautiful," he said. The work was beautiful. No one had ever used that word about anything she had done. She bit down on the inside of her cheek to keep her face from doing something she could not control. That is what I needed to tell you. Now, the question. He pressed his palms together. You are my mate. I felt the bond the moment I walked through that door. My wolf is certain. He has never been certain of anything except violence, and now he is certain of you. I am going to ask you to come with me when I leave this place, not as a servant, not as an Omega, as my Luna, as my queen. He watched her face. Whatever he saw there made him continue. But I need you to understand that I am asking. I am not taking. I have taken a great many things in my life, and most of them I do not regret. But you are not a territory, and you are not a throne. If you say no, I will still burn this pack to the foundation for what they have done to you. That is not conditional. What I am asking is whether you will let me keep you after. Sable stared at him. The thing in her chest was pressing so hard now that she could feel it in her throat, in the hollow, where her tongue should have been, and it was making the high, thin sound she had stopped making years ago, the one that was not a howl and not a scream, and it was making it without her permission. She needed him to understand something, and she had no words for it. She had no words for anything. She reached for the desk. There was a quill and a pot of ink and a sheet of parchment that Ulrun had been using for correspondence. She pushed the bread aside and dipped the quill and wrote in the small, precise handwriting that she had taught herself from books in the closet beneath the stairs. I have no wolf. The bond cannot be real. I cannot shift. I cannot howl. I am nothing. He read it. He read it again. Then he took the quill from her hand very gently and set it down. You have a wolf, he said. I can smell her. She is deep and she is sleeping, and she has been sleeping because no one in this place ever gave her a reason to wake. But she is there, and she is not nothing. She is the most extraordinary thing I have ever scented in my life. Sable shook her head. The tears were coming now, and she hated them, hated that this man she had known for 2 hours could reach past every defense she had built in 23 years, and find the soft place underneath. Kyle did not wipe the tears away. He did not touch her at all. He sat in his chair with his scarred hands on his knees, and he said, Eat, rest. You do not have to answer tonight. You do not have to answer tomorrow. But I am not leaving this house without you, so you should factor that into your considerations. Then he stood and walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. The bread is from our supply train. It has walnuts and dried rosemary in it. My mother used to bake it. A pause. She is also dead. We have that in common. He left. Sable ate the bread. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. The rosemary was sharp and the walnuts were bitter, and the dough was dense and chewy, and it sat in her stomach like a warm stone, and she pressed her hand against her belly and felt the weight of it, and cried because she could not remember the last time food had weight. Over the next 5 days, several things happened simultaneously, and Sable experienced them the way a person experiences a building being demolished while standing inside it, one structural failure at a time, each one revealing a new room she had not known existed. Kyle detained Ulrun and Horath, but did not immediately punish them. This surprised everyone, including Sable. An Alpha King had the right to execute any pack member who harmed a royal mate, and Sable was his mate, which meant the abuse she had endured was retroactively a crime against the crown. Instead of killing them, he had his lieutenant interview every member of Grey Mist one by one in the Great Hall. Lieutenant Dyer sat at a table with a ledger and wrote down everything. Names, dates, specifics. who had hit the mute Omega, who had denied her food, who had watched and done nothing. Sable from her position in the study could hear the interviews through the floor. She recognized voices. She recognized lies. She also recognized something she had not expected: pauses. Long pauses from wolves who had to sit with what they were being asked and realize, perhaps for the first time, that not seeing was its own kind of cruelty. Petra the cook was one of the last to be interviewed. Sable pressed her ear to the floorboards and listened. "I gave her broth," Petra said. Her voice was flat. "Every day. Broth with lentils when I had them. And the other wolves received what Lieutenant Dyer said: stew, bread, meat when we had it." Why was her portion different? A silence. Then Petra said something that Sable did not expect. "Because if I gave her more, Horath would take it from her and beat her for having it. The broth was what I could give without him noticing. 3 lentils. 4 when he was on patrol. I counted them every time." Sable sat back from the floorboards. She had never considered this. She had spent years counting those lentils as evidence of how little she was worth. It had not occurred to her that someone else was counting them too for a different reason. The second thing that happened was the discovery that the false trails were not a recent innovation. Kyle's trackers, a pair of lean, silent wolves named Voss and Tain, who might have been brothers, or might have been lovers, or might have been, both spent 3 days surveying the territory around Grey Mist. They came back on the 4th day with a map marked in red ink. 7. Voss said, laying the map on the desk in front of Kale. Sable was sitting in the corner, wrapped in the wolf fur cloak, which she had not taken off since he gave it to her. 7 false trails over the past 3 years, all of them defensive. All of them designed to redirect enemy scouts into natural hazards. Ravines, bogs, a stretch of thin ice over the river. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, Tyne finished. He looked at Sable with an expression she could not read. Whoever built them has an understanding of lupine gate mechanics that I have never encountered. They can reproduce individual wolves' prints, not just the species. Individual animals. We found a trail that mimicked Grey Mist's beta so precisely that I walked it twice before I realized the stride length was fabricated. Kyle looked at Sable. She picked up the quill. I learned by watching. Every wolf leaves a different mark. I have been watching for 17 years. "You built all 7 of these," Kyle said. She nodded. "By yourself?" Another nod. "In the dark, in the snow, barefoot?" Nod. He turned to Voss and Tain. "How many lives did those 7 trails save?" Tyne consulted the map. If the enemy scouts had reached their intended targets, conservatively 60 to 80 wolves, the thin ice diversion alone prevented a raiding party from reaching the nursery. Kyle's eyes closed. When they opened, they were not amber anymore. They were gold, pure, bright, burning gold, and the air pressure in the room shifted again, and every wolf in the house flinched. 80 lives, he said quietly, and they fed her broth. The third thing that happened was Horath. On the 5th night, Sable could not sleep. The bed in the study was too soft an absurdity, her body rejecting comfort because it had been trained on stone. She got up and padded barefoot down the corridor, meaning to go to the kitchen for water, and she found Horath in the hall. He was in a holding room, a small chamber off the great hall, with an iron-banded door. Lieutenant Dyer's guard had left the viewing slot open, and Sable could see him through the gap, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his wrists bound in front of him with leather cords. He looked smaller than she remembered. She had spent 9 years flinching from this man mapping his footsteps, timing her movements around his patrols. He had broken her wrist. He had burned her calves. He had tied her to a post during her heat and left her there for 3 days while she shook and wept. In her mind, he was enormous. He was not enormous. He was average-sized, and his hair was thinning at the temples, and his eyes, when he looked up and saw her face in the viewing slot, were red-rimmed and wet. "I know you are there," he said. His voice was hoarse. "I can smell you. You smell different now. You smell like him." Sable said nothing. She could not say anything. "Verlaine told us you were cursed, that your mother was a rogue who mated outside her pack, and the goddess punished the bloodline. She said keeping you was charity. She said if we treated you like a wolf, the curse would spread." He pressed his bound hands against his face. "I am not saying this to excuse myself. The King's lieutenant asked me if I understood what I had done. I told her yes. She asked me when I first understood. I told her a lie. I told her I understood when the King arrived." He lowered his hands. "The truth is, I understood the first time I hit you. You were 11. You had taken an apple from the barrel. You were sitting on the kitchen floor eating it, and you looked up at me. And you did not look afraid. You looked resigned. 11 years old and already resigned. And I hit you anyway because if I admitted what Verlaine was doing was wrong, then I had to admit I had been part of it, and by then it had been 5 years, and 5 years of cruelty is a weight that does not let you turn around." Sable's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the door. "The King will kill me," Horath said. "I know this. I have made peace with it. But I want you to know that the apple, you taking the apple and eating it on the floor like it was the finest meal you had ever had. I have not stopped seeing that in 9 years." Sable stood at the door for a long time. Then she turned and walked back to the study and sat on the too-soft bed and pressed Cale's cloak against her face and breathed in cedar and iron and did not sleep. In the morning she wrote Kyle a note. "Do not kill Horath." He read it. His face did not change. "He hurt you." She wrote, "He is not the only one who hurt me. If you kill everyone who watched and did nothing, you will have to kill the entire pack. That was an option I considered." She looked at him steadily. He said, "What would you have me do?" She wrote for a long time. He waited, patient as stone. "Make him build the ravine where the scouts fell. It needs a proper trap system. Reinforced sides drainage, so it does not flood in spring, a warning system for our own wolves. He knows construction. Make him build it. Make him build the thing that I built with my bare hands in the dark, and make him do it knowing that I am the one who designed it." Kyle read the note twice. The corner of his mouth moved. It was not a smile. It was something more complicated. "You want him to spend the rest of his useful life building your traps?" She nodded. "That is crueler than killing him." She picked up the quill. "I know. His eyes did that cracking thing again, the ice on a river thing. And this time what was underneath wasn't hunger. It was admiration. Raw, undisguised, slightly awed admiration, the expression of a man who had just realized that the quiet creature he had claimed was not quiet at all, but simply operating on a frequency he had to learn to hear. "Done," he said. On the 6th day the attack came. Sable had been expecting it, not the specifics, but the shape of it. The Ashclaw clan had lost 3 scouts in the ravine. Their alpha, a wolf named Dren, who controlled the northern passes, would not absorb that humiliation quietly. Sable had been watching the tree line from the study window, tracking the movement of birds. When the crows stopped circling the northern birches at midday, she knew. She wrote one word on a piece of parchment and ran through the house barefoot, the wolf fur cloak streaming behind her, until she found Lieutenant Dyer in the courtyard. The parchment said, "Now." Dyer looked at it, looked at Sable, and drew her sword. The Iron Fang contingent was mounted, and in formation within 4 minutes. Kyle materialized from somewhere in the house, wearing half his armor, the chest plate strapped, but the arm guards dangling, and his eyes were already gold. "How many?" he asked Dyer. "Unknown. The Omega says now." "The Omega is correct. I can smell them. 200 at least, coming through the birch stand." He looked at Sable. "How did you know before I did?" She pointed to the sky. "The crows." He stared at her for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Stay inside. Bar the doors. If they breach the house, go to the cellar. There is a passage behind the wine rack that leads to the river." Sable shook her head. "This is not a negotiation." She wrote on her palm with a finger, the way she had learned to communicate when paper was not available, tracing letters against her own skin. He watched her hand reading each letter. "I can help. I know the trails, all of them, theirs and ours." "You are not a fighter." She traced again. "I am better than a fighter. I am a map." He looked at her. The gold in his eyes flickered. She saw the war inside him, the wolf that wanted to lock her in a tower and stand outside the door for the rest of time, fighting with the man who had read her trails in the snow and understood what she was. The man won. Barely. "You stay behind the line. You do not engage. You point. I will read your hands." She nodded. The battle for Grey Mist Valley lasted 3 hours. Sable spent it on horseback, behind the Iron Fang forward line, wrapped in the wolf fur cloak, directing troop movements with her hands. She had never ridden a horse. The saddle chafed her thighs raw, but she knew every inch of the terrain, every frozen stream, every patch of thin ice, every narrow gully where a cavalry charge would compress to single file and become vulnerable, and she communicated all of it through a system of gestures that Kyle read without hesitation, translating her silent language into roared commands that his wolves obeyed without question. She sent the left flank through the birch stand where the snow was deepest, knowing the ash-claw wolves would be slowed by the drifts, while the Iron Fang war horses, heavier and wider-footed, would pack the snow down and ride on top. She directed the archers to the ridge above the frozen creek, where the wind consistently blew south and would carry their scent away from the enemy. She identified the ash-claw alpha dren by the distinctive spacing of his wolf's tracks in the churned snow, a pattern she had memorized from studying his scout's prints, and she pointed him out to Kyle with one hand while gripping the saddle horn with the other, and Kyle said, "I see him," and shifted. The Alpha King's wolf was not black. Every story said it was black. It was dark grey, the color of wet slate, and it was the largest wolf Sable had ever seen, the size of the war horse she was sitting on, with shoulders like a bull and a head that seemed too heavy for any spine to support. He hit Dren's wolf at full speed, and the sound was like 2 trees falling against each other. Sable watched from the horse gripping the mane, because she had dropped the reins, and the thing in her chest was pressing harder than ever. Pressing, and the high, thin sound was building in her throat, and she thought, not now. Not here. Not in the middle of a battle, but her body had stopped listening to her. She opened her mouth, and the sound came out. It was not a howl. It was not a scream. It was something between the two, a keening, wavering note that cut through the noise of combat like a blade through cloth. Every wolf on the battlefield heard it. Every wolf stopped. Kyle's wolf released Dren and turned toward her. His gold eyes were wild, uncomprehending. Lieutenant Dyer mid-swing froze. Dren's wolf, bleeding from the shoulder, staggered back and stared. Sable clapped her hands over her mouth. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. And then inside her, the sleeping thing woke up. It did not unfold gently. It did not stretch and yawn. It detonated. Sable felt her spine arch, and her vision white out, and her skin split along lines she had not known existed. And for one terrible incandescent moment, she was two things at once: a mute, starving Omega who had never shifted in her life, and something else, something that had been curled in the marrow of her bones for 23 years, waiting for a reason to emerge. Her wolf was white, not pure white, off-white, like old ivory, like bone, like the snow she had spent her life leaving prints in. She was smaller than Cale's wolf, much smaller, but she was fast and she was silent. And when she landed on the churned snow of the battlefield, she left no tracks. None. Not a single print. She stood on the snow the way a bird stands on water, her weight distributed so perfectly, so instinctively that the surface did not break. She moved, and the snow did not know she had been there. 300 wolves watched a white wolf walk through a battlefield without leaving a mark. Kyle's wolf approached her. Slowly, the massive grey head lowered until his muzzle was level with hers. He breathed against her fur, and she felt the heat of it, and the thing between them. The bond was not a thread, or a chain, or any of the metaphors the stories used. It was a sound, a frequency, the same frequency she had been operating on her entire life, the one no one could hear, and he heard it. She pressed her forehead against his. The ash-claw wolves retreated. Not because they were ordered to. Because they saw what they were looking at, an alpha king and a trackless wolf standing together on a battlefield, and something in their collective animal brain understood that this was not a fight they could win. Dren shifted back to human form. He was bleeding freely from a wound in his shoulder, and his face was grey with pain, but he looked at Sable's wolf and said loud enough for the field to hear, "That is a ghost walker. I have not seen one in my lifetime. My grandfather said they were extinct." Kyle shifted beside her. He stood naked in the snow, covered in blood that was mostly not his, and he did not look at Dren. He looked at Sable. "Not extinct," he said. "Sleeping." Later in the study, with the fire burning high and the smell of pine resin and blood and melting snow filling the room, Kyle told her what a ghost walker was. "The old bloodlines," he said. He was sitting in the chair again, and Sable was on the rug by the fire, because the too-soft bed was still too soft, and the floor was a compromise she could accept. She had shifted back, and the shift had left her exhausted and shaking and ravenous. She was eating bread and cheese with both hands, alternating bites, and he was watching her eat with an expression that suggested he would happily watch her eat for the rest of his natural life. Before the packs organized, before the kings and the territories, there were wolves who served a different purpose. Not fighters, not hunters, trackers, but not ordinary trackers. Ghost walkers could move through any terrain without leaving a trace. They could read any track ever made by any creature, and they could replicate it perfectly. They were the intelligence network of the old wolf nations, spies, strategists, map makers, the ones who won wars before the first claw was drawn. He leaned back. They were hunted almost to extinction during the pack wars, because both sides wanted them, and neither side could tolerate the idea of the other having them. The last known ghost walker died 200 years ago. Sable wrote, "I didn't know what I was." No one did. A ghost walker, whose wolf never woke in a pack that cut her tongue, so she could not speak. They buried you alive, and you still saved them. 80 lives built with your bare hands in the dark. She wrote, I saved them because if they died, there would be no one left to ignore me. Even cruelty requires an audience. He read that note for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were gold again. But it was a different gold than before, softer, less fire, and more candlelight. Come with me, he said, not because of the bond, not because of what you are, because I read your trails in the snow and they were the most intelligent, most creative, most stubbornly alive thing I have ever encountered, and I want to spend the rest of my life trying to understand the mind that made them. She picked up the quill. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, feeling the roughness of the feather against her thumb and the slight resistance of the nib against the parchment. She wrote, yes. Then underneath it she wrote, but I want my own desk. His laugh was sudden and startling. She had not heard him laugh before. It was not a polished sound. It was rough and surprised and slightly too loud, and it cracked open the last wall she had built around herself, and she sat there in the firelight, with breadcrumbs on her chin and tears on her cheeks. And she thought, This is what it sounds like when someone hears you. The claiming ceremony took place the next morning in the courtyard in the snow. Kyle had wanted to wait. He had wanted to take her back to the Iron Fang stronghold, give her time, let her settle into a life that did not involve closets and broth and counted lentils. Sable had overruled him. She had written in very small letters, Do it here. Do it where they made me nothing. Do it where they can see. He had read that note and said, You are going to be a terrifying queen. The pack assembled. Grey Mist wolves and Iron Fang soldiers together, filling the courtyard in concentric rings. Ulrun was there, stripped of his alpha status, standing in the back row, with the expression of a man watching his own irrelevance materialize. Horath was there, still bound, flanked by 2 Iron Fang guards. Petra was there. The Omega girls were there. Sable stood in the center of the courtyard barefoot. She had refused shoes. She wanted her feet on the snow on the ground. She had walked 1,000 times in the dark, leaving trails that no one followed, until the one wolf who could read them came along. She was still wearing the wolf fur cloak. Underneath it, Lieutenant Dyer had found her a dress from the Iron Fang supply stores, plain black wool with a high collar, and it was the first garment Sable had worn in years that she hadn't stolen from an animal. It fit. It was warm. It had pockets, which she found unreasonably moving. Kale stood before her in his full armor. He had cleaned the blood off, or most of it. There was still a streak along his jaw that he had missed, and Sable reached up and wiped it away with her thumb, and the intimacy of that gesture in front of 300 wolves made the courtyard go completely silent. He spoke the old words. She could not speak them back. He had anticipated this. He had learned in 6 days to read her hands, her eyes the set of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head. When he asked for her consent, she placed both her hands on his chest over his heart and pressed. He marked her. The bite was on the left side of her neck, just above the collarbone, and it hurt. She had been expecting a romantic pressure, a symbolic gesture. It was not. His teeth were in her skin and her blood was in his mouth, and the bond between them closed like a door that had been open her entire life, a door she hadn't known was letting in the cold. The pain lasted 4 seconds. The warmth lasted. It spread from the bite down through her chest and into her belly, and down her legs and into her feet, and for the first time in her life, her feet were not cold. She marked him back. This surprised him. It surprised everyone, but the bond required reciprocity, and Sable had spent 23 years having things done to her, and she was finished with passivity. She stood on her toes, and he bent his knees, and she bit the scarred side of his throat, right over the old wound where someone had tried to open it, and she tasted his blood, which was hot and tasted like copper and cedar, and his wolf made the recognition sound again, the one from the kitchen, the low, rolling vibration that meant, "I know you." Kyle addressed the pack. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "This is Sable. She is my Luna. She is the ghost walker who saved your pack 3 times over, without your knowledge, without your thanks, and without your basic decency. She cannot speak. She does not need to. You will learn to listen with your eyes the way I did, or you will answer to me." He looked at Horath. The Gamma was staring at the ground. "Horath of Grey Mist, you are sentenced to serve the Luna's strategic command for the remainder of your natural life. You will build what she designs. You will maintain what she creates. You will do this knowing that every trap, every false trail, every fortification that protects this valley was conceived by the woman you tied to a post and left in the cold. If at any point you falter in this service, I will revisit the simpler sentence." Horath looked up. He looked at Sable. She met his eyes and held them, and she thought about the apple about the 11-year-old girl sitting on the kitchen floor, eating an apple like it was a feast. And she thought about the 9 years of pain that had followed, and she decided clearly and consciously that she could hold both of those things in her mind at the same time, without either one cancelling the other out. She nodded once. Horath's chin dropped to his chest. Kyle turned to Ulrun. The old alpha was trembling. "Ulrun of Grey Mist, you allowed a child in your care to be mutilated, starved and brutalized. You were the alpha. It was your duty to protect every wolf under your roof, and you failed in the most fundamental way an alpha can fail. I am stripping your pack of its autonomy. Grey Mist will operate as a vassal territory of the Iron Fang Dominion. Lieutenant Dyer will oversee the transition." He paused. "You will live, not because you deserve to, but because my Luna has shown me that survival can be its own punishment, and I have learned to trust her judgment." Sable felt the weight of every eye in the courtyard. She stood in it. She stood in it the way she stood on snow, distributing the pressure so evenly that nothing broke. In the afternoon, before they left for the Iron Fang stronghold, Sable went back to the kitchen. She went alone. Kyle let her, though she could feel the tension in his wolf, through the bond, the low hum of an animal that didn't want its mate out of sight. Petra was at the stove. She looked up when Sable entered, and her face did something complicated. Sable picked up a bowl from the shelf. She filled it with stew from the pot on the stove, the real stew, the one with chunks of meat and potatoes and thick brown gravy. She set it on the table. Then she picked up a second bowl and filled it with broth, thin broth. She carried both bowls to where Petra was standing and set them side by side on the counter. Petra looked at the bowls. She looked at Sable. Sable pointed to the stew. Then she pointed to the corner of the kitchen where the Omega girls usually ate. Then she made a gesture with both hands, palms up, that meant everything. Petra's eyes filled. She nodded. Sable picked up the bowl of broth and poured it down the drain. She watched it swirl and disappear, 3 invisible lentils spinning toward the dark. Then she walked out of the kitchen and into the courtyard, where the Alpha King was waiting beside a horse that was too large for her, and a wolf that was too big for the world, and a bond that was louder than any howl she could have produced. She climbed onto the horse. She settled the cloak around her shoulders. She looked back at the pack house once at the window of the closet beneath the stairs where she had slept for 17 years, and the glass caught the winter light and threw it back at her like a small, cold star. She turned away. Kyle brought his horse alongside hers. Their knees touched. He reached across the gap and took her hand, and she let him, and his fingers were warm and rough, and they wrapped around hers completely. She traced a letter on his palm with her free thumb. One letter, H. He looked at her. She traced more letters, slowly, one at a time. H-O-M-E. He tightened his grip on her hand. Home, he said. 300 wolves rode south through the birch forest. Behind them, the snow held only one set of prints, the Iron Fang war horses, heavy and deep and unmistakable. Sable's horse left tracks like all the rest, but Sable, when she closed her eyes and felt the bond humming in her bones and the ghost of her wolf turning in her chest, knew that when she chose to, she could walk across the snow of the Iron Fang territory and leave nothing behind but the faint smell of cedar and the memory of silence, finally broken. The wind picked up. The birch trees bent. The snow began to fall, covering the old tracks, the false ones and the real ones, the ones that had led enemies to their doom and the ones that had led a king to his mate. Within an hour, the valley would be clean, white, and unwritten. A blank page. But Sable was done with blank pages. She had a desk waiting for her. She had maps to draw and traps to design, and a kingdom to learn, and a wolf who left no prints, and a king who read every mark she made as if it were a love letter, written in a language only he could speak. She pressed her face into the fur of the cloak and breathed in cedar and iron and rosemary and snow. The horse carried her south. The king rode beside her. The wind erased everything behind them. And for the first time in 23 years, Sable's feet were warm.